today, and our conversation is on industries and ideas in the world beyond COVID-19. Now, we are still a little bit worried about what COVID-19 is and what kind of economic impact it's going to have on the world. Now, many experts have predicted that we may fall into some form of recession. And now looking back at some of the lessons picked from as far back as 2003, 2008, 1930, when the first global recession happened, did we learn enough? With us today, we have a panel of experts. Mr. Daniel Bwambale, he's an administrator and also an aviation expert. I'll say someone very enthusiastic about the aviation sector. Now we'll talk and dive into the aviation sector a little bit later because it's one of those that have been most affected. We also have Liz Muange. She's a Yelp fellow, if I'm to be right, the first Yelp fellowship. She was part of that cohort, and she also works with investors and SUED or SWED, if that's the right pronunciation. Liz, thank you for joining us. Now, for those watching us wherever you are, please use that hashtag COVID-19 reset to be part of the conversation. You can also tweet us, and we want to thank our partners today, which is the LéO Africa Institute in collaboration with the McNulty Foundation. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. But thank you for ensuring that this webinar is live. It's streaming now on our Facebook pages, LéO Africa Institute. You can also tweet us at LéO Africa. Instagram is at LéO Africa Institute as well. Now, Daniel, I just wanted to start with you. And I believe you're a very optimistic gentleman out there. But our conversation today is, these industries of the future post-COVID-19. And we already think about post-COVID-19. But let's start by talking about impacts today of COVID-19. Digitization, what is going to change in regards to how the world has been functioning, and in particular East Africa, post-COVID-19?
Thank you, Arnold. I hope you can hear me very well. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you, Daniel.
So we had the impact just on the digital space. I think the verdict is still out, but just from the micro level, how much we are consuming via data, how much we need to, for instance, those of children in particular schooling system, we are having Zoom as a tool to use for classroom environment, Shobi, another app and all that. Even then, even health-wise, the number of apps launched officially and unofficially between March and now is astounding. And how many people actually responding to that from the population is also something that nothing from the drive by governments or NGOs or any well-meaning individual would have achieved in such a short space of time. So I think digitally, we already are thinking the impact is so huge currently. I will not go further into the post, because post there are a lot of things to do. But now we are thinking, how do we even synthesize the information we already have? How do we bring it together? How does it make sense? Create an official sitting behind the desk to know that this city functions this way. And do we have that information in the first place? So I think the impact on digitization is quite huge. We even have tourism taking place online. That is how far or how bad things are.
Okay. I can see there you're already moving about 2, 3, 4 steps forward. There, Liz, if you can hear me, I want to bring you to be part of this conversation already. Liz, just before we dive into what your article said, and Daniel will also do that a little bit later, I just want you to give us maybe a synopsis of what's happening in the investor world. Who are they hungry for? How much, just looking at the numbers this morning, the amount of FDI taken out of just the Nairobi Securities Exchange in the past 2 months has totaled to over 10.2 billion Kenyan shillings. People are skeptical about investing in the continent or investing in the past industries? What are the investors thinking? Liz, could you hear me? We seem not to have Liz ready. Daniel, I just want to come back to you a little bit there. Daniel, when you look at the digitization that you've been talking about, the number of applications that have been launched, right? That's what we're already moving to the future. Now, let's go a little bit backwards. Yelp has been organizing conversations on future of work. There's been a talk and conversation on things like STEM education needs to be pushed. Is this the wake-up call that we should have done this earlier?
Yes. We tend to procrastinate a lot because we always have a fallback plan, which is the multilateral institutions, the international community, as you may call it, but which is basically Northern Europe and the Western world, USA. So we procrastinate before these people push us into doing something. We think maybe, well, we have this plan to be good, but someone needs to fund it. Now, like, and in an even worse space than we ourselves. So I'm thinking there are things we are looking at right now that are so stuck, like, why didn't we do this before? You know, the future of work conversation should have happened and should have helped change the curriculum setup of all countries here in East Africa, probably 10 or 15 years ago, when other countries were getting onto the AI speed wagon. We should have been talking about the fact that our population is on such a rise that by 2050 we shall have 1.3 billion Africans living in cities. If we're having 1.3 billion people living in cities, will it still be the same people riding border borders? Half of those 500 million border borders across Africa? Or shall we have to retool and see that there are changes within the way we are setting up all these young people for the future? You're talking about something to do with work itself. Work has changed, you know that. The industry is now, you can have even a 10-acre space having 2 people, only security and robots for this.
Yeah, but Daniel, that's what I'm talking about, and that's so. What happens to the people that don't have the skill sets to be reskilled and move forward? What happens to the people that have previously invested in the past industries? How do you translate that into a post-COVID-19 scenario? What happens with the coming in of more efficiencies?
Yes. So what happens is you can either retool and have these people go back into the world of making software, because automation is there. So it needs to be worked upon by highly skilled individuals in the work, to program it, to make it itself, to, you know, precision engineering, etc. Or you could look at the industries that actually employ masses, you know. Post-COVID, you're talking about tourism. Manufacturing may not employ 200 million Africans by 2050, but tourism could, because tourism is basically selling stories and selling sites, and human beings will always travel. At least lockdown and prove that the cabin fever we are feeling right now proves that we are more social and communal animals than we previously thought.
Liz, thank you for joining us. I just want to bring you back a little bit into the conversation. We made the introduction of Liz. Liz Muange is a Yelp fellow, and also she's going to give us a bit of insight on what the investors are looking at. And Liz, I just want us to start from there. The numbers as of this morning were 10.2 billion Kenyan shillings, which is, you know, more than 10 million US dollars has been taken off the Nairobi Securities Exchange alone through FDIs. Investors are taking their money out and taking it back, and they seem to be very skeptical about Africa at the moment, East Africa to be more specific. What is the investor appetite looking like right now?
Thanks, Arnold. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. You're definitely very right. With a situation like COVID, it's a pandemic and it's very uncertain in terms of, what the outcomes will be. So a lot of investors are taking out their funding and either, holding it, with the hope that maybe they can assess the situation and then look to invest, depending on when they see they can come back in. But I think that's a normal reaction because I was reading an article that even personal savings are being withdrawn, for example, from SACCOs because people want to be able to have, the money with them because they don't know for how long, the situation would last. So it's pretty common. And the other types of investors, for example, the private equity funds that invest in companies, they're also waiting to see what the effects of this pandemic will be before they can actually, rely on, the financial projections they've done and be able to invest in companies. So I think it's a normal reaction. And depending on how soon the economy, how soon a vaccine is found, how soon the economy can open up, how soon businesses can be able to, adapt to, working in a COVID environment, that will kind of be the indication as to when the economy can open up and how investors will invest in future.
Liz, I just want to stay with you there. When we look at things like the informal sector and how much of an impact it has, the lack of data, which Daniel also wants you to piggyback off as well. The lack of data has showed that we don't have the mechanisms to know how much the informal sector is actually making or how much it should be given in order to help it bounce back. Now, 70% of employed people in this region are in the informal sector. How are we going to bounce back? How do we enable the informal sector bounce back?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. For me, I have actually, like in my article, singled out the informal sector, the urban informal, because a lot of, if you look at the urban areas, there's quite a lot of semi-skilled and low-skilled workers who are actually contributing quite a lot when it comes to doing, odd services, as well as also participating in trade. Because if you look at the markets, like if you look at all our key markets where we go and shop and get food, that's an informal market. But so when you talk about data, it's interesting in the fact that the informal sector impact investors have not really invested in the informal sector as they should have, because these are the this is now the sector that's really affected by COVID and is really the one that drives our economy in a sense. Getting data, about informal trade, about cross-border traders has really been a challenge. It's not something that has been discussed now. It's actually been something that we've been trying to look into. How do we formalize, cross-border trade? How do we formalize the informal sector? And I think it's becoming pretty clear now during this COVID environment that we need to be able to understand these businesses. Can we formally register them? Can we also know where these people are located and where they're actually, even where they live, because a lot of them also operate in different places. Markets move, hawkers move, and all that. And this, when you look at it from the standpoint of COVID, because they are the ones who should really benefit from whatever welfare the government will provide, because they are the ones who, the risk of them not being able to do their work during lockdown is high. But then, it's going to be a bit difficult to be able to give this assistance to them directly, mainly because of the fact that they move around. So I think data in its sense, what's interesting is we're seeing the government really trying to cope with even just being able to track, from the victims of COVID, like trying to track, and trace the people who've been around them. And it's interesting that as much as we have when we live in this technology age, it's still a challenge for them to be able to do that. So as Daniel mentioned, I think the the need for having good and accurate data and being able to collect it and use it to make useful information is going to be quite key. And that information, as we've seen during COVID, can be used for so many different things.
Daniel, I think you can piggyback off that. How important is data going to be? Is this going to be more important than oil? But data, even more so, translation of it.
Yes, data is a big thing. If you read Kai Pule's AI Superpowers, data is basically the next space war. So that is how important it is. Oil is not as important as data, especially because oil is on its way down, just like manufacturing is getting automated. Now, Liz has mentioned something important. She said that, of course, we all agree that data is so important, but how do we then collect it? I think it's a common example we tend to forget because it's in the public health, ironically, public health space, the HIV/AIDS pandemic. You know, to get data from to test and know and get data from these people had to be tied to a benefit. What was the benefit? Receiving ARVs. So we are not able to collect data from the informal sector because we have not tied the collection of the data to the benefit they're going to get. We collect data to either, know about crime or tax them. We tax them and then don't provide any services to them. So they think any collection, any effort at collection of data is more of state overreach. Instead of thinking, when the state collects this data, they're giving us a bank which will give us low interest loans so that we scale up and etc. happens. So I think that is the next step each and every smart government should look at. To collect data, they need to tie it to a benefit so that that data is legit or valid rather, and we get these people responding more cooperatively.
Daniel, data allocation itself and collection is still an issue for many of our African countries. Now, I want to take a step back and also look at what has been working for us and what are the opportunities for us as a continent, all the way from here in Kigali to you in Kampala, Liz in Nairobi as well. One of the things that was supposed to be happening this year is the African Free Continental Trade Area Agreement. It was supposed to be operationalized on the 1st of July this year. More trade. Now, the figures that are out there is that Africa is the continent that trades with itself the least of all continents in the world. We trade more with the rest of the world than with ourselves. Could this COVID-19 be the opportunity for us to bring back trading within ourselves and open up the borders for some of our countries?
Yes, let me go first. I think this is actually true. You see, your question started with data and how it can be collected, and you just need to look at Kigali, Kinshasa, Bujumbura, Dar es Salaam, Dodoma, Kampala, and Nairobi. What has been the impact of the mobile money platform in those countries? This is an informal, basically it stemmed from the lack of a banked population, which was deemed, by all these actuaries and the people who are in the investment world as people who don't, or who may not understand banking. And the understanding banking perfectly, the amounts of money transacted over this platform is stupendous, and how much is saved is also absolutely astounding. Now, when you come to ACFTA, why MMO are successful is it has a benefit. They get loans, they keep the money safe, they can transact. It's a platform that opens up to all kinds of possibilities. ACFTA as a network, COVID has showed us that nationalism is the last resort for every country. However, for Africa, we are actually, in most cases, the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa could be taken for one nation. So I do not understand. Of course, the politics is a little murky, but even the politicians know that a hungry person will kill them. So we are talking about the life of a person, the life of a nation. If we do not operationalize SFTA and related to it, the single Africa air traffic market, which the transport market, then we're actually going to lose the benefit of the lessons we have learned due to COVID, which is, number one, we need to be more resilient. Two, always stock up for a rainy day. Three, have efficient supply sources, because right now we're suffering a single source failure. Our source is China, and we are failing to even manufacture because we can't get the raw materials from China. You can imagine a country or a continent as rich as Africa depends on China for.
Daniel, isn't that in there the opportunity? The opportunity to,
yes,
in regards to things like the supply chains, to move away from China and maybe spread them out across various African countries?
Absolutely. There's no reason, if you have a tile making factory in Bugesera, you should have to get the raw material from China. You could get it from easily from across Uganda or from across Tanzania, Kenya. Or there's no reason why a Nigerian imports rice from Mexico when there's Benin, or South Sudanese imports shoes from China when there's Ethiopia. So we just need to operationalize SFTA, because that single source failure has really cost all these economies a lot. Some are going to go in negatives, unfortunately.
Liz, there with the investor appetite in regards to selling ourselves as one block. Now, East Africa as a block in the past has tried to do that. And then that has broken down to coalition of the willing, and then the Northern Corridor teams. And at times you go to many of these tourism events and you have, Rwanda, Uganda, to Kenya, all marketing themselves as one destination. Yeah. For investors, do they also look at us as a potential one market?
Yes, Arnold, they do look at, they look at East Africa as a market of, is it 150 million mouths to feed? They look at it, the population size, and a lot of them come into one country thinking that it's very easy for them to get into another. So they'll come to invest in Kenya maybe first, but their aim is to actually kind of like play a key role in each and every market. But just also to answer your question and also the question you asked about AFCTA and where I see the challenges lie is that when I look at East Africa, I worked in a trade and investment project for about 4 years, and there we were marketing, East Africa as a potential destination, especially for US, customers to come and buy and, really take advantage of, the natural things that we have here that we can make and send to the US via the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And I realized that when you're taking companies, you'll take a coffee producer from Burundi, from Kenya, from Ethiopia, from Rwanda. And as a region, I think where we need to get to is we need countries to really understand where the competitive edge is. If, for example, the coffee, let's say from Rwanda, is really good and is selling because of something else. Why don't we invest a lot of resources on having them take coffee from other countries and then process and then sell, and then have another industry, for example, in Kenya, because Kenya has a competitive edge on that. And that way, because all the raw materials we buy from each other in a way. We buy from each other, and then we compete with each other, even at the global market. And if you look at us, we're very small countries. So that aspect of countries really identifying what their competitive edge is, focusing on that, and then working with the other neighbors to be able to develop a very strong industry that actually feeds off of the value chains across the markets. I think that would be a very important step. When it comes to Africa trade, I personally saw that there's very little trade between East Africa and, let's say, for example, West Africa. Like we were dealing with a lot of textile companies. They have to get their fabric from China because they don't get fabric, let's say, from Ghana, and Ghana has fabric, But what I realized is that, do we even know, if we were to start the process of trading with each other, do we even know where these businesses are? How do we ensure that businesses get to know about each other? because trade will always start from businesses. It won't start from good policies. It's the businesses that have to trade. They have to meet the demands. They have to really understand, what the markets they're looking into need. Then the other aspects of business come in. Then they'll need to, ship the goods there. Logistic challenges. The cost of moving across Africa is very expensive, and it's likely to even be more expensive during COVID. So, and then the other things like policies and all that. So to open up Africa, I think we first need to get to understand and have more business-to-business linkages, and that will happen when we really understand what are the sources of raw materials that are critical, that are in different parts of the world, or where is actually the market. So I think it would start from there, even before we move on to other things like access to finance and policies. But yeah,
Liz, just before you go on to your next point, Liz, I just want you to give us an answer from a question that you've asked. How can we know more about each other's businesses?
Okay, what I see works well is having things like buyer missions, trade missions, opportunities for businesses to have like B2B networking sessions. And normally what happens is these are very targeted. So for example, you'd have specific for people in textile, you'd have specific for people who are producing, furniture and those kinds of things. And what I like about global trade is that, in the Western world, there, like if you're, let's say in fashion, there's so many shows, but these are targeted. And when you go there, you're going to meet specific buyers who want your product. Like you'll come up with orders. But with Africa to Africa, I haven't seen good companies or governments really taking that role in a big sense, because a lot of us think when we want to trade with Europe or the US. We never think about Africa. There are some interventions that had started, like with ITC and with a few other companies to try and, good trade show organizers to try and do that, like with North Africa, West Africa. But the challenge is that I don't know how this, actually these forums will happen, with COVID, and it would be nice to see how conferencing and events will adapt. But I think that the other thing is online presence. If there's a good online presence of companies, it would be easy to search and see. And then other things like due diligence, because you have to do due diligence to really understand you're working with credible people. So that's where business associations really need to play a key role, to be able to have a good database and good information about their companies, that they can actually act as that link with people who need that kind of information. So information, data, will still be the driving force, and it's going to be even more critical now that people will not be able to physically meet as much as they did before.
Liz, you brought out something very important, which was regarding the expenses. And Daniel, I want you to dive into these expenses in one sector, which is going to be critical to industries of the future, is aviation. East Africa has the most expensive flights from one capital to another in the world. Well, Africa has the most expensive flights from one part of Africa, West Africa to East Africa in the world for their distances. How do we first solve that puzzle to enable the industries of the future?
Thank you. You see, that is where the benefit comes in. We are flying only 92 million Africans per year. That is 2% of the world's traffic. 92 million people. Of course, East Africa could be contributing close to 10 million of those, because it is a very active region. However, the question then becomes, if our aviation sector is beholden to all these interests, political, social, their trade unions and all that, we have to look at a model that works for the rest of the world. The benefit, when you talk about SFAT and selling Lato milk to Kenya or Bujumbura, and there's a plane that is flying half empty every day to Bujumbura or to Kilimanjaro, why wouldn't I use that plane to ferry that milk instead of using, say, a railway, a rail link or road or something like that? Those are some of the questions you need to answer. Airport handling charges need to reduce. The taxes need to reduce. But above all, East African countries really need to come back to the drawing board and know that, look here, we're doing ourselves a disservice by thinking first of the parochial interests of the nation, which actually becomes a disadvantage. Because I don't think if 7 million Ugandans were flying today, whether the benefit to the economy is not much more than the few taxes they get from the 1.2 million plus who use Entebbe every year, just because we have to tax Kenya Airways, Tanzania, and all those other flights. If we had a flight between Nairobi and Kampala of $100, or we even had an East Africa ticket, once you pay $120, $150, you're able to fly to an East African city. The opportunities to those countries are just much better than the taxes, which could be $20 per person or 10 that we get from the few that fly. So to me, aviation, and this has been talked about quite often, aviation, we shouldn't miss aviation. The way we leapfrog the world and went into mobile money, aviation is the future. People, you had to come from the wagon, the horse-drawn carriage, came to the steam train, came to the roads. The roads ruled the 20th century. It's the 21st. Aviation is the future for us. So we have to do it. Otherwise, we're not. SFT and all these other initiatives are dead on arrival. If I can't fly my mangoes from Kasese to Bukavu, then what am I doing? Because anyway, there's no road between Kasese and Bukavu, but at least I can fly. So give me that incentive. And then from Bukavu, I don't need to come back to Kasese. I need to pass Rwanda and pick Agasha juice, bring it to Kampala. And then from Kampala, I take LéO to Nairobi. From Nairobi, I pick whatever goods I have done and take to Kilimanjaro. That's the only way to actually come out of this quandary as Africans.
Daniel, don't worry, I'll bring you some agasha next time I'm in your city. Just for those watching us across Facebook and the attendees on here, there's a poll going out there, which is, do you think your workplace sector or industry will be disrupted significantly by the COVID-19 pandemic? Now, it's a multiple choice question, and feel free to fill that in. You can tweet us again using that hashtag COVID-19 reset. Now, Liz, there are no private sector players in aviation locally in the region. What you would look at the small flyers, Jumbo Jet, it's also KQ. We all know the troubles that are there and with the Kenyan government, and hope it can survive post-COVID-19. How do we get private sector or investors interested in East Africa's aviation scene?
Wow, that's an interesting question, maybe for Daniela. But yeah, aviation, I think, is a very interesting industry, because even if you look at it globally, there's also that aspect of these airlines. They have that aspect of national pride, and governments want to really have a big stake in them. But I think it seems like, from what I've seen in terms of business models, like a lot of the airlines, like it needs some government subsidy as well for them to be able to operate and make money the way the way the business models were. So even now, I think it like we saw when Buffett, when COVID happened, he sold all his shares in airlines, because he knows, the struggles they will have, given the fact that air travel is one of the most affected. It's literally the most affected. So I don't think it's going to be an attractive industry for private sector. Maybe I think it's going to. I think what needs to happen, and maybe how we need to think about it, is how can logistics be changed and be more efficient. And when I was speaking to another YELP class of 2018, Wanjuhi, she was telling me, I think there's an article she was reading about how in terms of our flower exports to Europe, that they're thinking about how do we use now the ships and maybe harvest the flowers early, and then by the time they get to Europe, they opened up. And I think that's what I was alluding to my article, that we air travel is one option, but I think even as it's struggling to come back to life in a way that works well, given the circumstances of the COVID, I think the logistics will have to innovate in a sense, because it's very critical. So I don't have an answer yet, and to be honest, maybe the innovations that will come up will attract private investors. But it's really an interesting sector to watch, and because air travel won't stop. And I think where it had gotten to, people had a lot of interest to travel, to see the world, and that interest will still be there. But I mean, I don't have a direct answer in terms of how that will change private sector appetite for the sector.
If I can come in, Arnold.
Feel free, Daniel.
Yeah, so basically, as Liz has said, why is Africa's aviation sector weak? It's weak infrastructure, low liberalization, high taxes, and basically, for the past, now it can be talked about insecurity. But look here, how do we make Liz and her partners think of injecting a sizable amount in a startup? Africa has close to 750 major airports, and these airports support 7 million jobs. And these airports generate at least $90 billion. That is basically the whole Kenyan economy per year. And this is on the basis or on the back of 92 million flyers. We are talking about a post-COVID window where we are thinking, if I got 1 million Rwandans coming to Uganda to tour, and conversely got 2 million Ugandans going to Rwanda to tour, what is the best way to bus them around? What if a ticket between Kigali International and Entebbe was basically $80 or 100? Would that then cost Daniel and his family of 3 to come and live in Kigali and spend $1,000, which they could have spent on the ticket instead? So those are some of the issues. But we need to interest Liz and her partners in the investment world to say, look here, as East Africa, we have opened up. A person can operate up to 100% shareholding in a plane, in an airline. They can own an airport. They can construct an airport and own and run it, as long as it conforms to the standards of the Civil Aviation Authority. In fact, they can inject capital in the country. You have to really look at Qatar Airways. I know COVID and all that and the impact it will have on the Kwizera International. But look at all the airports coming up in East Africa. If you have an airport city, and I have to call it an airport city, like Kwizera International, like Julius Nyerere, like Kenyatta, look at it as an airport city. An investor wants to invest in that. The way Bwambale has done it with hotels, with recreation grounds, and all kinds of stuff, museums around, training schools, aviation repair shops, etc. So we, as East Africa, we need to show the leases that, look, this industry is the future. Give us the money because it's for the future. But in any case, let us underwrite you by having legislation that ensures that actually we are doing the right things for the future and for you to recoup your money. Because no investor, capital is a very shy being. You know that. Thank you.
To say you're passionate about aviation is an understatement there, Daniel. Liz, in terms of recovery, one of the sectors that are being flaunted, and that's just within the past week or two, by the global shapers and the World Economic Forum, is the green economy, and how that is going to be able. Now we're already seeing the effects of climate change, especially Africa as a continent. We've seen this affect our major breadbasket, which is agriculture. But how much of a role can something like the green economy and us shaping towards a green economy help our economies recover post-COVID-19?
Yeah, I always say that COVID happened to make us really think about climate change, but actually act, because it was all talk and not really much of a concern from a lot of people. But I think now, everyone in a way is getting to understand kind of like the effects of it. I think it's going to be extremely important, and it's going to be embedded in quite a lot of what investors will be looking for in terms of opportunities to invest. Mainly because being able to adapt, either to climate change or being able to respond to climate change in whatever form, in whatever way in terms of business, will be important. And I think it's going to be a key. Maybe let me say criteria that investors will be looking at when they're trying to invest. Yeah, but I think maybe just also to answer your question, because there's also that aspect of inclusivity and sustainability, which climate change, I think, has one aspect of that. But then there's also other things about building an inclusive economy. And one of the things that we're doing in the project that I work in, which is the Sustainable Urban Economic Development Program, we've identified about 12 municipalities in Kenya. And these are really tier 3, tier 4 towns. And, they need, they're growing in population. And one of the things that they need to do is to be able to have, the relevant infrastructure. And also to build value chains, because if you look at, they have all the factors of production, but they're not really doing much in terms of production. So, and there's possibility to, to have good labor and everything. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really understand, especially in this COVID context, yeah, how do we make them respond? And some of the things includes, food production. It includes also how we can adapt their market such that then they're able to trade and do their business, with social distancing and everything. But what it's sort of like brought into mind into our project is the fact that, urban economic development will be a key focus, and urban economic development has to really look into incorporating climate resilience infrastructure. So I think it's something that is going to be embedded quite a lot in what investors look at as we move along.
Daniel, is this the opportunity for us to go green, and how are we going to do this?
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with Liz's submission that we have to go green. And now how to do this is we have to leverage that basically two key players, but a third minor but key important one. That is the state or government, then the investment world of the leases, and then the minor but very important are the citizens. Now, if you're talking about 1.3 billion Africans by 2050, 30 years from today, which is the average age of this panel. Yes, we're talking.
I think Liz and I are not yet there yet. Eh?
No, you are not yet there. Neither is crazy. I'm a bubble.
Yeah.
And they sit here. Anyway, so 1.3 billion Africans in cities. And I can assure you, the building styles we're doing right now, the design, the process, the way we build is basically unsustainable already. Using bricks, then we burn them with trees which were cut down. Then we have to use a lot of mortar to put up a structure. We're talking about interesting Liz's world, the investment world in modular housing. But to interest Liz's world in modular housing in an African city, in a municipality such as Rua or Bujumbura or something like that, you're telling her to commit billions of dollars in an industry where you don't have regulation or you don't have a guarantee from the government that they recoup the investment they want. So now the government, all governments that are smart in East Africa, must see this. Because to assure you, in 2100, Kampala was the 16th largest city in the world with over 40 million people. That's a country by itself. We're talking about Nairobi being a megapolis, Dar es Salaam, Kinshasa being the second largest after Lagos in the whole world by 2100. Even by 2050, it should be among the top 10 in the world. if you do not have housing, but also you don't have a government that knows that since this COVID pandemic showed us that the slum is unsustainable as a means to police and to govern society, we couldn't even distribute food, we couldn't even test, we couldn't know whether someone has died. Why don't we invest companies that do modular housing? They come and cook for us, sustainable green homes in, say, the suburb of Chimirongo in Dar es Salaam, you see in Kampala, or near the taxi park, the bus parking. Nyarugo, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about interest in Liz's world, then it is the government going to take the initiative. If you're talking about interest in Liz's world, you're going to tell her, look, we have a plastic waste problem in Africa and East Africa, but KWS makes plastic roads. In fact, India already has 52,000 miles of plastic roads. They are longer lasting, they are cheaper, and to conduit utility lines out through them is much better because you model them. They're easier to model. You don't have to break the tarmac and cross the fiber optic cables. That is a government initiative. Now, if the people who are the third element come in and say, look here, we know how much we suffered during this pandemic. If you claim that in 3 years these houses shall be done, we can move away, live somewhere else, give us a guarantee, give each one of us a title ahead of time, and we shall come back to live here. So where 1 million people are living, you could put 6 million citizens. And that's what we're looking at, because by 2050, we have 1.3 billion people in cities. We shall have fought climate change and the intense urbanization rate, which is actually more sprawling slums that we're facing, just by having a smart government, convincing the investors and the people that this works.
Okay, I just want to open up to a few questions out there. And this, I believe, Liz will be in the best position to answer this question. It comes from an anonymous attendee, so no name there, but a person is asking, at the center of Africa building its resilience and local capacity to enable intercontinental trade is capital. How can Africa build its capital base to enable entrepreneurs who will take advantage of some of these ideas of the future? Building our capital base, how do we do that?
You know where I sit, to be honest, I would say there's a lot of capital. There's a lot of capital. I think what happens is that—
How do we unlock it?
Yeah. I'm getting to that. Yeah. And I'm gonna, kind of like attack it more from the entrepreneur side, because entrepreneurs who have been able to attract capital, it's very easy for you to really understand what investors are looking for, and there are various types of investors. There's for each and every level of a business as it grows, there's a capital provider, for that level and type of business. And where I see entrepreneurs going wrong is that you could be a small startup, and the kind of investors you're approaching are not really the type of investors who would be interested in your level of business, given the kind of support that you need, because a startup will require quite a lot. So one of the things that I tell entrepreneurs is really understand for where you are in terms of the level of growth. If you're in 3 years, if you're in 5 years, if you're in 10 years, there's really, and also depending on the kind of progression you've made, there's, in terms of cash flows, in terms of revenues, in terms of market access, to be honest, there's a lot of capital. It just depends on how you're able to narrow down and define exactly the type of investors that you should be approaching. And it's important for entrepreneurs to know that, because then you don't waste your time, going around and being frustrated and to investors who are really not the right type of investors for your business. And when I say investors, it's a very broad term for financiers. There's microfinance, there's banks, there's SACCOs, and there's also angel investors who invest at really early stage. And then as the business becomes more formalized, develops cash flows, develops records, develops track record in the market, then there are other types of investors who see it and become interested, including banks. So when I talk about investors, it's a broad term for financiers. So when it comes to trade, one of the things that I have to say is that when it comes to trade, one of the challenges I've seen, especially with local banks, because they're the ones who should provide trade finance capital, is that sometimes if they don't understand, the actual trade transaction, if they don't have confidence in terms of the buyer and the risk that is being taken, there are issues in terms of them really financing businesses. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of challenges, especially for small SMEs, because small SMEs find maybe they create good products and they're able to get a market, but they can't do bulk business or bulk orders the way a large manufacturing firm would do. So a bank would trust a transaction from a large manufacturing firm versus a small SME. But there are ways to work around that and building the confidence of that transaction to banks. But to be honest, I've seen it as a struggle. But what I like about the financing world is that we have so many alternate types of financiers who are willing to give opportunity to SMEs. It's just a matter of SMEs being able to understand who are some of these alternate financiers. And that's why a lot of SMEs, when we advise them, we really try to understand who's providing what capital in the market, and for the kind of business we're looking at, where would they be able to attract funding. So, where I see capital, it's just also about the strategy that entrepreneurs have. But I would also believe there's still room for improvement in terms of having more local financial institutions that actually are willing to lend to what we consider risky sectors, sectors that are not well defined, like real estate, really going down to where the SMEs are providing services and actually providing capital to them.
Okay, there, Liz, I wanted to follow up that with, just wanted to give us a bit of clarity on some modules, or give us specific and details and say, if you don't function like X, we could function like Y in order to get to the end result, which might be Z.
Yeah, so I don't encourage businesses to really go out of their way to change their business models, because if you are operating in a certain way and that's how you're supposed to operate, you really shouldn't change because you're trying to attract a financier, because it won't be sustainable. And what happens is that there are transactions where financiers come to realize, oh, you know what, maybe an entrepreneur oversold or something, and it's not really the right business model. And I think what you raised is a very important question in terms of businesses taking the time to really understand their business model and how it can change and how it can't change. And I think one of the things that is also so important is ensuring that businesses, businesses are also confident that whatever growth they want to pursue, whatever business model they want to adopt, they're able to be confident even to investors, so that investors can see this is how the business is willing to grow. And the reason I say this is because investors come in and invest for a certain time. And before they invest, they might not even know much about your business model. They're looking at it maybe from what happens is that investors really look at, they come with certain parameters, either certain sectors they want to invest in, or because, the impact in the sectors is defined or the return is defined. And what happens is that they need to take a lot of time to understand businesses and the business model. And what happens is that during this time, and which we know which happens during either due diligence, they're able to really understand what it would take for them to, improve the strategy of a business so that the business can grow to get a certain return or not. And those are the situations where, it becomes very clear as to what can be, how a business model can really change. But I normally tell businesses, if you've been doing something for a long time and it's working, and an investor comes in and maybe they want to push you to another level, you need to take the time to understand whether this is right, for you. So yeah, kind of like that's how I support businesses to analyze whether a certain investor is good for them or not.
Thank you, Liz. They're very detailed answer. Daniel, there are about two questions that I think they go towards you here from some of the people who are watching us. And one of those is from Wanjuhi. She asks, what's the role of the African Union and regional bodies in creating these business linkages?
Agenda sponsored by these countries anyway. So we have an interest in making sure that these countries adopt what they bring to the table. Regional bodies, on the other hand, have particular degrees. You know, like I stated earlier, when you work with a tendency that dad can always give me a loan to survive, which is what Africa has been doing. We shall move on because we know China is the World Bank and IMF and nearby. So we can't do things with the seriousness we deserve. But if dad is dead and mom is destitute, there's a difference to the way you approach, the way you work, and the way you do things.
That's very radical.
Yes, the West will take long to, the West will take long to recover. The AU must, if we are to survive as an African bloc, we have to have the single African air travel market ratified and operationalized. Like she said, like Liz said, we have been talking, but COVID has made us act. You know, we are making ventilators. There's no African country which has a serious research university that's not making a ventilator, an ICU ventilator. You know, people are thinking radically. This was unheard of. This is just 3 months, 90 days. And people are thinking of all this. So the AU must act on this single African air travel market, and the regional bodies must make sure the politics just gets out of the way. We don't need closed borders. We just need as much as possible to facilitate everything else, especially trade.
A question for both of you also coming in here from one Jimmy is regarding if we are to go to the industries that we are talking about, which, you know, the green economy and then the fourth industrial revolution, if we had fast track them and leapfrog the issue of reskilling many of the current labor force comes into play. And so how do we go about reskilling that labor force? Liz, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because I mean, I already saw the gaps when, a few years ago we were working on a leather project here in Kenya where we took a few entrepreneurs to look at the sector in India, and we were realizing that the highest quality bags and leather accessories that we do, some of the entrepreneurs do here, is equivalent to maybe what are a second year fashion student will be creating, in those markets. And it may not even be equivalent because those might even be of higher quality. And that also just, began to show me that even before COVID, like what we're taught in school, what we need for industry, but also what we need to be competitive in a global world where me as a young person working in a certain field, I should be able to, be as excellent as, a person from, a developed country. We weren't there yet, yeah? So now with COVID, and I think what COVID brings about is, of course, the use of technologies, the fourth industrial revolution, like, we're talking about how do we leapfrog. I think, this is kind of like what's going to propel us to leapfrog is just the fact that technology is going to be a key. For technology, for us to be able to use and implement, we need people who can be able to, maintain systems. We need good programmers, we need good developers, but we also need to be the ones. I think that for us to get to the level of technology adoption that we need to, there's going to be a lot of requirements from, you know, government and I think private sector to support, because it's going to be a very expensive affair, especially if you want to drive inclusivity. You know, for now, for example, you know, digital learning has always been a trendy topic. You know, we've had companies that have come up, raised so much money because they're offering digital platforms. But when you look at it now, reality with the pandemic, so many students, especially those in public schools, they can't afford and they can't access, you know, technology to be able to continue learning. So there can't be this inequality gaps, you know, if we really are to get to the level that we need to. So it's not just about reskilling. I think it's going to be a whole system shift and creating that enabling environment for the use of technology, but also us being able to develop in a strong way. So I think that's an opportunity to watch and to just see. I think government efforts need to come out strongly on this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Liz. Daniel, reskilling, but also your parting shots on what the industries of the future will look like.
Yes, reskilling, Arnold. In 2018, there was an interesting report by the World Economic Forum, 2018 Future Jobs Report, which stated that by 2022, 75 million jobs as we know it would have been lost due to automation and the fourth industrial revolution. COVID just multiplied that figure by a factor of, I think, 6 or 7. So we're talking about 400 million jobs in total.
Daniel, we need optimism. We need optimism. We need optimism.
Yes, so now the Institute for the Future, a California-based agency, already said 85% of the jobs existing in 2030 have not yet been invented. Now, 85% of the jobs, so we are losing this, but then we're gaining a new paradigm, like 85% of those jobs. And what do they require? Because now we're talking about lifelong learning. I work with the judiciary, and there are people who had sworn never to use a laptop. Now the judiciary is telling us we must, as a matter of national importance, use Zoom. We have all these licenses and Microsoft Teams, etc., to conduct our trainings, our meetings, our seminars, and also to conduct court with serious legislation back. What does that call for? Communication, character, creativity, and citizenship. And once these are together, I'm sure that the jobs that I predicted, or the future industries I predicted, that is, and I forgot one important one, which is housing. But number one is data and data analytics. We have tourism. I am certain, unlike Liz, that we shall rebound on the tourism side. I'm also certain that we're going to have a lot on the pharmaceutical and research element, because Africa is virgin in that area. Africa needs a lot of infrastructure, but is very virgin in pharmaceuticals. I'm also certain that we're going to have a lot of rebounding and growth in the sector of EdTech, M-Shule, all those concepts, the apps, we can do them. If we did mobile money and M-Pesa, there's no reason why we can't have schools having an app that could do that. I'm certain that for East Africa especially, the future is very bright, because we just are so virgin in the territory of investment and infrastructure that it is only an investor who is not wise that wouldn't bring their money into this territory.
I'd finally some optimism from you, Daniel. Liz, as your parting shots, what are these industries of the future?
Yeah, I think that, you know, Daniel has mentioned it, but I'm just going to add the fact that, you know, with COVID, it's going to bring a lot more social awareness on hygiene, on, I think social distancing will still continue. So businesses that are able to adapt and be able to create new business models around that, you know, enhancing those norms will definitely be key. And I did mention in my article some of those, so please just go and read the article. But I think what I would also want to say is that, you know, where I sit, because I work in the development finance world, I feel that we definitely have the opportunity to invest properly in the where the gaps are being seen, you know, infrastructure, healthcare, connectivity. We need, as I said, and I say it again, we need to be more inclusive. And inclusivity means, you know, it's the SDG, leave no one behind. And I think that we can't move forward in the way that we were moving forward in terms of, you know, the rising inequality gaps. And, you know, as I go back to government, I go back to private sector, I go back to each and every individual. I think, and I take it from myself that, you know, as I work, as I try to attract more investment, it has to be more thoughtful and really ensure that, you know, with this pandemic, how do we come out stronger?
Thank you very much. There, Liz Muange speaking to us from Nairobi, Kenya. She's a Yelp fellow. Thank you for making the time, Liz. You can check out Liz's article on the LéO Africa Institute page. Also, Daniel Bwambale, an administrator, and he also works with the Uganda Judiciary Commission. Also, thank you for speaking to us from Kampala, Uganda. My name is Arnold Kwizera, coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda. This was our second in four-part series on a post-COVID-19 future, brought to you by the LéO Africa Institute. And we can keep this conversation going across various social media platforms. Don't forget to follow LéO Africa Institute on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And for those watching us on Facebook as well, thank you for the participation. Joel Essien, you sent in your remarks, wasn't able to read them, but I'm sure we'll be able to respond as well. Thank you. And thank you for making the time. I'll hand you over back to the Deputy Director of the LéO Africa Institute, Mr. Kwesi Tabar.
Thank you very much, Arnold, and thank you very much, Liz. Thank you very much, Daniel. This has been such an insightful conversation and really informative. I'll not waste a lot of time for our panelists and participants, because I know this debate will continue in some form, maybe on Twitter. Just a parting shot from the Institute. This has been the second of a four-part series. The first one was on the future of jobs, and the second one has been on industries and ideas for the future. The third one that's coming up on the 18th of June is on leadership in a pandemic, and that will be hosted by our founder of the LéO Africa Institute, Mr. Awel Wihangani. That will be much later in the month of June, so we'll definitely keep you posted. The fourth conversation will happen in the middle of July, and that will focus on the mental health aspects of the pandemic that we're living through. On behalf of the LéO Africa Institute, I'd like to thank you.
Kwesi, just before you log out, you owe us something. You owe us our poll results.
Oh, sure, please. The poll that was sent out earlier did ask our participants, do you think your workplace, sector, industry will be disrupted significantly by the coronavirus pandemic? And 87% of those who answered the poll said yes, they think their workplace, sector, and industry will be significantly disrupted by the coronavirus. 13% said they don't think so. So I don't know in which camp those belong, the optimists or the pessimists. But short of that, I think it goes to show how really uncertain even the experts are on how the world will turn up after this pandemic. And for the Institute, this is why we're invested in conversations like this, bring together young Africans across the continent to really reflect on this moment, which is so significant. It may be the only defining moment in our lifetime. So you will talk about your lifetime in terms of life before this pandemic of 2020 and life after the pandemic of 2020. That is how significant this moment is, and why it's important that we reflect on how we go through. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Yeah, just before we go, and I'm sorry that I'm wearing my TV and moderating hat. There was a recommendation for all those that are watching us that came in from Wanjuhi, where she said, and I think Wanjuhi and Daniel may need to take it offline a bit. For those tuned into today's call and are fascinated by airlines like I am, please read upon Southwest Airlines by Harbor David Keller and to Rainer, led by her favorite, CEO Michael or Larry, that must be Australian. These two airlines survived 9/11. Southwest is always making profits, and I am paying attention to those two budget airlines to see how COVID-19 will impact them. Mr. Katompanga, your answers are going to be given to you online, as well as Mr. Mohammed Kash. Kwezi, allow me to say goodbye finally, and thank you for a very insightful conversation, Liz, Daniel, and Kwezi, for hosting us this evening.
Thank you as well. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.